Welcome to the Collecting Insight podcast. I'm Lori.
And I'm Sarah.
And we're here to share our exploration into being human.
Inspired by coffee meetups, we dive into topics that confound, mystify, and inspire us, leading to a space where we can better understand and enjoy this precious life.
Our perspectives are definitely distinct, but it's the intersection between them that our most amazing conversations and insights erupt.
We are so excited you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Lori.
How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Good. We have a special guest here today, David Cohen, with us. And we're honored to welcome you here today, David. You're a proud Vermonter, a lifelong public servant and Vietnam War veteran with a great life story. You and I met at the gym, 81 years old, and you're always in the back right corner of the class and lifting heavier weights than everyone else in the whole friggin' class. You work harder than the rest of us. You're one of the strongest, most affable, wonderful human beings I've come across in a long time. You always have a smile on your face. And even after recently having had open heart surgery, you returned to the gym just weeks after. You are a mentor for the rest of us, letting us all know that we can get through all of the tough times. If any of you listeners happen to ever drive in your car from Burlington to Colchester, Vermont, any day of the week, rain or shine sometimes, you most likely will see Dave cycling on one of his 20-mile rides. Are you getting the gist of who Dave is yet? I will paint a bigger picture.
We talking about me?
Yep, I knew you were going to say that. So after graduating from UVM with a degree in psychology with minors in chemistry and zoology and earning recognition as a distinguished military graduate, Dave was commissioned into the U.S. Army Medical Service Corps at the height of the Vietnam War. You served with distinction in the Mekong Delta, and later, after extensive medical training, you were the director of a POW hospital in Long Binh, experiencing firsthand the challenges, sacrifices, and camaraderie that shaped your generation. But Dave, your service didn't end when you returned home. You went on to build a successful 35-year career in telecommunications. You earned your MBA with honors and later served Vermont's Department for Children and Families for a decade. Dave, you and your wife, Carolyn, whom you married in the 8th month of your Vietnam tour on R&R to Hawaii, you have 2 kids and 5 beautiful grandchildren who I know you're very close with. Through it all, you've remained active in your community, devoted to your wonderful family, and committed to living with purpose. Your dedication to your family and community is a testament to your character and values. So Dave, today we're diving into your time in Vietnam, how it shaped your life, and what it means to carry those memories forward. It's such a privilege to have you with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's well-deserved.
It's a nice thing to be able to come and talk about this, so Thank you again.
You're welcome. I think it's really important for generations to come and our young generation now, and even our generation, to really understand what happened in Vietnam. And, I know, Sarah, you have people in your family who love to have served our country. And I always talk about my dad as having served the country, but I always remember him saying, Lori, when those guys got off that plane, no one even gave them a goddamn beer. And
that's true.
And after all that you all did for all of us, with the best intentions, I just think it's really important. We all know what happened over there, hear people's stories, and I know you, and I know you have a great story. So,
Okay.
All right. So let's get started. Dave, can you take us back to when you first found out you would be deployed to Vietnam? What was going through your mind?
Well, I was at UVM, and as you said, it was the height of Vietnam. And I knew that whatever my draft number was, it was probably going to come up. And I figured I would much rather be an officer than an enlisted person. You get more choices. You get, I won't say it was any safer, but I felt that I had a better opportunity by being an officer. So I joined ROTC. I went advanced ROTC. And then when I graduated from UVM, I was commissioned as second lieutenant. I did not go immediately into the service. I was granted a 1-year delay to work for the telephone company. And the Army was quite pleased to let me do that to hopefully gain some management skills and supervisory skills and whatnot. But in July 1967, I received my report to duty. And I went to Fort Sam Houston for my medical service corps training. And we were in the height of it. I mean, when I went through training, Fort Sam Houston, which only is a place for doctors and medical services people. We even had a Vietnam village that we had to go and practice, if you will. Eventually from there, we graduated and I was given orders to be the commanding officer of a medical dispensary. It was a mobile dispensary. It was classified. I even have a secret crypto clearance, if you will, which I probably couldn't get again if I wanted to. And I reported to Fort Devens in Massachusetts, and I was attached to the 29th VAC hospital. And that went along very nicely. I had a very small staff. And then I got orders from the Army that said, "Greetings from your president. We're going to send you to the Battalion Surgeon's Assistant School," and commonly known as BSA. And BSAs are only deployed in one place, and that's the front lines. And I wasn't too pleased about that. And I went to the commanding officer of the 29th VAC hospital, and I said, "I'm raising my hand to volunteer to go with you guys," because they were preparing a hospital to go to Vietnam in about 8 months. And they said, "Well, we got an open slot for you. Let's see if we can get you out of your orders." And they were able to do that, and that's how I landed up in the 29th VAC hospital. So I avoided front lines, but I did not avoid things that happen in hospitals.
When you landed there, what was your sort of first impression?
Well, we deployed as an entire hospital, and we went over on a transport ship along with a couple of thousand other people. And we landed in a place called Vung Tau. And Vung Tau was the Riviera of Vietnam. It was gorgeous, beautiful sandy beaches, quiet, just beautiful. I said, "Wow, this doesn't look so bad."
Yeah.
And then the next day they loaded us in a C-130 transport airplane and brought us up to Long Binh. I said, "This isn't so great after all." So the first impressions were not very realistic of what was to follow. And even Long Binh was the largest army post, or I should say the military post, in all of Vietnam, and had upwards of, I think at one time during the war, 75,000 troops. It was huge, and had all the imaginable amenities that you could expect. So those were my first impressions. And then when we finally deployed to our hospital down in the Delta, then you knew you had arrived, because down there, the only thing that really controlled the area were the Viet Cong. And we were plopped down right in the middle of a pretty big field. And the hospital had already been built. And we started to equip it and get it ready, sandbag it a whole bit. So we were there right in the middle of nowhere, and we had maybe I don't even know if you can call it a fence, but there was a fence that surrounded the hospital. No gun emplacements, no sandbags, no guards. And the closest things to us were maybe 200-300 yards on one side, an Air Force base, and then another 200-300 yards was a Navy base. And that was the extent of it. And that's when you start to get worried because we knew that the VC had pretty much the run of the Mekong Delta. And we're saying, we don't have anybody here protecting us. I'm not so sure this is going to end up too well. So, yeah, we lived with some fear for quite a while. I think the saving grace, at least for the hospital, this goes back in history now, back when President Kennedy was in office, he commissioned 4 what they called civilian war casualty program hospitals. These were fully equipped evac hospitals. They were the successor to MASH, if to give you some idea of what they were like. These hospitals were dedicated to taking care of anybody that came through the front door, be it friend, enemy, U.S. troops. We treated them. And the good thing is that the VC recognized very quickly that if they got shot up and they showed up at the front door, we were going to take care of them. And we did. Without reservation, without question. We had other people too that were, I don't know, have you ever heard of like Air America?
Mm-hmm.
So you know who Air America was. It was the CIA. They used to come in with their mountain people, and we would treat them. They didn't get any paperwork done. That was the deal. But everybody else, we actually wrote up admissions and dispositions for all of these people.
Yep. I've seen photos of the hospital you've shared with me. And let me tell the listeners that it does not reflect today's hospital. It is, I mean, we can share some photos on social media so that people can see, but can you paint a picture of what it looked like and what some of your experiences there were?
Okay. As I said, this hospital was being built long before we even deployed to Vietnam. It's a 400-bed hospital, and by comparison, I just took a quick look at the UVM Medical Center, which is a level 1 trauma hospital, has 562 beds. So this was not a small hospital. It's not a general hospital, but it was, it was good sized, and we used to have a pretty good census in there. I believe, and I could count them, but I think there were 20 wards of 20 people each. And it was fully equipped with an operating room. It had its own X-ray office. It had a pharmacy. It had medical lab. And, of course, the emergency room where I was located. But before I go there, I'll tell you what else. This hospital had its own water supply, a water treatment plant. It had an electrical plant. It had a sewage plant. I can tell you a funny story about that some other time. But this was a fully contained operating hospital that basically nothing could happen that, short of getting bombed, that you couldn't keep operating without any difficulty. It had its own motor pool with ambulances and jeeps that we used to transport people to the airport. People, I should say, patients, excuse me. And that hospital was open 24/7, obviously. So the way it worked, I was the admissions and dispositions officer for the hospital. And by the way, I wasn't really the director. I may have been the director of my own little personal fiefdom, but I was the first one who, so to speak, saw them come in and leave.
I call that a director.
Okay. I had a staff of, I don't know, maybe about 7 or 8 litter bearers, some clerical assistants. But and we were in charge of the radios. So we were in contact all the time with helicopters coming in, the medevacs. Sometimes there were even the Huey warships that had wounded on them. They would call into the hospital. They would give us a time that they were going to be there. We would be out there waiting for them with the stretchers. And we would bring them in. We would log them in, get them registered. Obviously, if they were real serious cases, they went right into the ER and they were treated by, for the most part, board certified doctors and fully qualified nurses.
Within the hospital, I'm just thinking about you treating everyone. Were there ever experiences of discord within the hospital, or did everyone respect what you were trying to do?
Well, that's a difficult question. We probably, and I don't remember this, but if I had to guess, we did isolate the Vietnamese from the troops.
Yeah.
Let's face it was a barbaric war. It really was. And we weren't terribly innocent either. You just recall My Lai, and there were always these mythical stories of taking people up in helicopters and interrogating them, dropping them out the helicopter. So it was barbaric, and we didn't have any reason to say that we were pristine clear about this. But there was never any question of the staff of treating anybody and giving them any kind of different treatment than any of the soldiers that came in. I will say this. This is part of the stuff that you try and forget, but when you serve in a hospital, and one of the things that it's sometimes difficult to recollect, but you grow up real quick. And I can remember bringing in all sorts of people in all sorts of states of disrepair. And when you get a mass casualty, that's, I think there were periods of time where I was doing IVs and I had my hands in bullet holes, and those were, they were tough. But I think the toughest ones that I would see would be the ones that they would wheel in after a mass casualty, and they look fine. And the doctor would say, "We haven't got time to fool with this one. Roll them into the back, put the screen up." Usually it had been a head wound, and they were exhibiting what they call chain Stokes, where you take a deep breath and then nothing for 30, 40 seconds. And it's just a matter of time before they die. And I never could understand the first couple of times that I saw this, why they wouldn't do anything about it, or even evacuate them to the 24th evac hospital, which was back in Long Bin, which was the primary place for head injuries. And they said they'd never make it. And, after a while, you say, okay, I understand. If it wasn't really terribly busy, we might try and get an evac to get them up there to see if they could do anything. But watching people die where you can't do anything about it that's pretty traumatic. And, later on in life, I've seen people with chain Stokes, and it's never pleasant.
You just mentioned trying to forget. And I'm curious, as you sort of look, and we'll come back to this, but as you look at your life, do you feel like you tried to forget over the last 50-something years? Or did you, what memories have surfaced through these were they always there? Or have they come in fits and starts? What does that look like?
I think they were always there. I just never talked about them.
Why?
Well,
when you
never felt comfortable, I guess.
Did anyone ask when you came home? When
I'm sure they did. And
Yeah.
I just,
and you just didn't.
no, I just said, let's do some nice things. It's some of the other things, you want to hear the gory stuff. Okay. I'll tell you some of the, I had a staff that would do anything for me. They were just great. And I treated them well too. Thank goodness for a year of managerial skills. I learned that anything you ask your folks to do, you better be able to do it yourself. And there was one thing that they would never, ever do. And they said, that's your job, not my job. And I was taking a helicopter pilot who had been shot out of the helicopter and bringing him to the morgue. It's incredible how many of those pilots that I had to take out of a helicopter. Just awful. And that you remember. I remember one of the Navy petty officers, I think he was a petty officer. He may have been a SEAL even, I'm not sure. They ran around in these little river patrol boats on the Mekong Delta, which was very close. And this guy came in. I mean, he was swearing up a storm. His chest had a bed spring sticking out of his chest and all sorts of other wounds. I don't know how it happened because they were supposed to wear flak jackets, but I always remembered him. And I remember him leaving the hospital, walking out.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So it was a bad story, but a good story. And we had lots of good stories. I mean, when I came back, I was called a baby killer. And yet in my hospital, we probably had, I don't know how many births of Vietnamese women, how many people we treated for malaria. It just, those are the kinds of things that kind of throw you off and say, how can people say this to you? How can they be so ignorant of what's going on?
Now, when did you hear that, David? Like, such a awful thing.
When I came back, came back to Oakland, California, the actual hotbed of all the Vietnam protests, or one of the hotbeds. And I went through all the processing, and then I was walking out on the street. I think I was trying to get a taxi to get to the airport. And there was some baby killer and other vile things. And
do you remember how you responded?
I didn't. I was smart enough to know that I wasn't going to do anything to promote anything more dangerous than that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the old sticks and stones break your, bones, but words never hurt. You just ignore it and go about your business. At least I did. I think most people did.
Yeah.
Plus, I was carrying around about a couple $1,000s in discharge money, and I didn't want to
lose it.
I didn't want to lose that. That was the deposit on my house.
Oh, wow.
As I think about you sort of transitioning back, what were the things that helped you? Because I would imagine that you're sort of in an America where culturally it's divided. Like, how did you sort of find your way through that?
Okay. When I did get on an airplane, the first place I went was to Los Angeles. My sister lived right outside of Los Angeles. Carolyn had already been there. So the first people I saw were my sister and her husband and her 3 children and my wife, who I hadn't seen in 4 going on 5 months after seeing her for 6 days. When we got married in Pearl Harbor on my R&R. So that helped a great deal by coming back to people I knew, people who weren't going to do anything that was going to be,
chastising.
Yeah. And we stayed there, I think, a week. And then we got on another airplane, once again with my uniform on, and that was a little scary. And went to Washington and stayed with my brother who lived in Potomac, Maryland. We stayed there, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 days. And my mother and father were down there at the time. And so once again, a nice event, a nice way to get back into society.
Yeah, being around the people you loved. Yeah.
And then I had told the telephone company when I was returning, and they said, okay, we're going to give you a month of, time to get yourself together. So my wife's sister, her family owned a camp on Spalding's West Shore. And that was the first time I ever went there. And they gave us the camp for a month. And so the two of us were able to get to know each other again and spend some quiet time and do some things. And that also helped to, get me back, if you will. And that 1 month vacation turned out to be 2 weeks because my boss at the telephone company said, I need you now. And I want you to go to Fitchburg, Mass. And manage 3 offices in Fitchburg, Worcester, and Gardner. And he said, this is really a good move. So we said, okay, fine, we'll suck it up and we'll go. And he was a former airborne officer. So he knew what was going on, and he took pretty good care of me. He was a pretty good mentor for as long as I had him. So those are the things that kind of eased me back into society. I didn't come back with baggage like a whole bunch of others did. So that made it easier. I didn't have a drug addiction. I hadn't become a raging drunk, although we did enjoy a lot of beer. So I didn't come back with that baggage, and I was immediately thrown into work, which I think also helps. Yeah. If you have time to sit and concentrate and think about things, I don't think that's too good. Even at my age, it's not too good.
Yeah. When you went to the telephone company in Massachusetts and you started your work there, did you ever stop in the middle of the day and think, like here I am doing it? Like, how did that, did it feel less important or less imperative or life or death? Like, did it change you serving in Vietnam and then all of a sudden, helping, run this company? Did Vietnam make that easier because it wasn't life or death now when you were, or was it something different than that altogether?
I don't think I reminisced about it all that much once I was back.
Yeah. No, I meant your perspective, like how you felt about, that sort of work after what you had experienced. Yeah.
And maybe it's because I thought the work that I did was important when I got back.
Yeah.
But, I don't think I felt that way. Uh-huh. And a lot of people would say what I did in Vietnam wasn't so great anyway. So, at least now, most people would say, oh, you work for the telephone company. That's great.
Yeah.
So I think it's just one of those things you just have to put in the back of your head and just go on with your life.
Yeah.
Loud noises. So you would often find me on the ground, sometimes in the middle of the road.
Really?
Oh, yeah. That eventually went away after a couple of years. But
so you'd be walking down the street, hear a loud noise, and take cover.
Like back then, cars backfired.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'd hit the dirt.
And then did you have a whole response, like your heart rate and sweating and?
You stupid fool! Why did you do that? But it didn't. It was just momentary. It was. As I said, I came back, I think, reasonably adjusted.
I know. You're amazing. The strength.
Do you think it matters your innate personality when you're experiencing warfare? I know you experience warfare in that hospital. It's obvious. And I know you're not talking about all of it. But even some of the things that you're talking about with the men that they put in the other room because they couldn't deal with the brain injuries, or just all of that. Like, do you think your innate personality made you able to cope with that? Because I think I would be in a mental institution. I know, you know what I'm saying? I'm just.
Well, I mean, when I went into ROTC, I knew that I was going to go. So, I was a person who felt I had a duty and an honor to my country to do what was supposed to be done, and maybe naively felt that maybe my government thought or knew what it was doing.
Yeah.
Which I think was cast in some sort of question about my 9th month. But I never tried to do the things that some others did, go to Canada, fake injuries or shoot themselves in the foot and get back here. I really did feel that it was something that I needed to do. And I never begrudged myself for doing it. I know it scared the hell out of my family. It wasn't a pleasant year for them. But if you ask me would I do it again, maybe I would want to ask more questions. But war is hell, and there's just no getting around it. And I would say this without getting too political, and it's probably true for just about any war we've ever had. We went to Vietnam for a variety of different reasons, and at the time, I thought they were good ones. At the time, the Chinese were trying to gather more land, more people, and promote communism. So going there was doing something to make sure that we didn't have any communist people nearby, as much as we weren't anywhere near them. There was always the feeling that people should have the right of self-determination. I would say they should be able to choose the kind of government and the way they're going to be treated. And this was not happening in Vietnam. And that's why we said we wanted to go over there and protect them from communism, to eventually get them to be able to govern themselves. I facetiously say we sometimes went there so that the next wave of admirals and generals will get the necessary jobs in the military that'll get them up into the higher atmosphere, if you will. It's probably wasn't always facetious, but some of the reasons that we get into conflicts, if we had to do them all over again, you would say, why wouldn't we do a better job of trying to negotiate what needed to be done, do it without arms, do it without conflict, do it without all the deaths. And after about the 9 months, I became a little bit skeptical of some of the rationale that was given for being there. And I mean, you can go back to any war, go back to World War II.
Yeah.
We went to war because we got bombed at Pearl Harbor. But the genesis of World War II was a small group of people who wanted more power, they wanted more land, they wanted more money, and they were able to convince people that the way to do this was to go to war. And if you ask the mass majority of people about, do you want to be here? They'd say, absolutely not. So if you have all of these people who don't want to go to war, how does it happen?
Yeah.
And, this is the real tragedy of things that go on here. You could go to Afghanistan. You could say a whole lot of things. We went there. We went to Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction. And we need to spend more time in learning how to make love, not war. And the protesters in some respects had it right. And it's sometimes tough to admit it, but I just some of my philosophy has changed since I went there. And 56 years later, I just look at things and say, geez, that's awful.
Mm-hmm.
And the aftermath, I guess that's another short subject to talk about. I was back, I don't know, it was 1975 that you saw the last helicopter on the embassy filling up with people that had no way of getting in that helicopter, take off. And these people were stranded. They were friends of the United States, and we just left them in the lurch. And what's interesting, and I brought it, are you old enough to get AARP?
I'm close.
They just came out with their monthly magazine,
Yeah.
and it had an article about Vietnam and the fact that it's 50 years since the close of the war. And I forget exactly, I think it was Gerald Ford passed a law or a bill that provided money for Vietnamese refugees to come to the United States legally. And they were separated into 4 different army bases throughout the United States. And they all went through the process in processing. They were provided mentors if they hadn't had them before they came. And they were settled in the United States legally. And this, I'm not going to get terribly political, but the interesting thing about the Vietnamese people is that they became well-educated, unbelievable workers. And I don't remember, I think it was like 800,000 refugees. And the interesting thing is that 80% of them became legal citizens through the normal channels. And it's kind of fascinating that if you can do it for some, why can't you do it the right way for all of them?
Mm-hmm.
And you got both parties to blame for this, maybe one more than another, but the fact of the matter is that there are better ways to do things than to go to war.
Thank you for sharing those powerful words.
Yeah.
Because of what you've experienced and seen, see everyone as people. And when you haven't seen that, sometimes you almost don't see someone else's humanity. So thank you for sharing that.
One final comment on this. I got transferred from the 29th of Act to the 74th Field Hospital back in Long Bin. That was after about 8.5 months or something like that. And this was an interesting hospital also. This was a reserve hospital that was based in New Jersey. It was made up of war dodgers. You joined the reserve so you didn't have to go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Well, this hospital got deployed in its entirety to Long Bin. And they took care of just Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, and Viet Cong. And, after they'd gone to our hospital and they were well enough to be transported, they went to the 74th. And this hospital, unlike ours, had huge fences, barbed wire, concertina, guard towers. And even I had very limited access into the hospital itself. I was on the outside, if you will, and was guarded by a platoon or a company of military police, who were another interesting story. But they would all be interrogated by military intelligence, and the reports would come back to the registrar, which I was at that time, and it would become part of their folder. And I read through these, and you want to talk about tearjerkers. They were students. They were shopkeepers. They were doctors. They were business people. I mean, and every single one of them was conscripted for the most part. And they said if we had had a choice, we obviously wouldn't have gone in. So, it just kind of emphasizes the fact that you really need to try harder to stay out of war than to stay in it. Use sanctions, use, whatever you need to get people to bend to what is hopefully the right way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm done with my political speeches.
No. I'm always going back to my father, but one of the last letters that he wrote home to his parents, he was an only child. It was like he'd never told them all the atrocities that he witnessed and was involved in, a lot of them sounding similar to yours. And the last sentence was, Mom and Dad, if anyone knew what happened over here, they would never let it ever happen again in anyone's lifetime. Something to that extent. And so we have to listen to veterans, right? We have to.
History repeats itself, and it continues to do that.
But that's why it's important to talk like this, because I think just by keeping things in the forefront of our mind, it can help to prevent us and make us think about our actions a little bit.
Well, here's another thing that was kind of rankling, if you will, and perhaps got me not so happy to be there. Small groups of people wage war, or start wars, I should say. Large groups of people wage war. And they, I can't help myself. They sit back wherever they are in their headquarters, safe and sound, having their single malt with a cigar, and say, isn't it a wonderful world? And what they do is they tie your hands behind your back. I mean, when the first people went to Vietnam, they were ill-equipped. They were ill-trained. They had no idea how to fight a guerrilla warfare. The armaments on the vehicles were, any landmine would just blow them to pieces. The way we conducted the war was insane. I'll give you an example. In our hospital, I told you it was a Navy base and an Air Force base, and a very small fence around us. The Viet Cong would come to the back of our hospital, set up mortars right outside our fence. And they would lob these mortars over the hospital to bomb the Air Force base or the Navy base. And I'll digress just a bit. In the process of building these hospitals, we had these great big steel containers that, all our stuff was shipped in, and we surrounded them with sandbags. And whenever you knew a mortar was going over the hospital, you ran down into, they were Conex containers with sandbags, rows and rows of sandbags, and you would run in there, but you would never want to be the first person because the banded crate, one of the most poisonous snakes in the world, loved to go there because it was cooler. So it was always a very brave person who would go and pull this. They'd have to make sure there wasn't anything in there. But I mean, you have your flat jacket, your steel pot, and my M16, and nurses, and we had female nurses, so we were all. I'm in my boxer shorts and no shirt, flak jacket, the whole bit. You would run in there and hope to hell they wouldn't drop one on the hospital, a short round. But rules of engagement, when you are under attack. And I know this is true down in the Mekong Delta, which was Zone 4 or whatever they called it. If you were being attacked, you had to call the district head of the ARVN Army, which was the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, and get permission to shoot back. Oh, my God. So you're sitting there listening to the plop, 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 and you know exactly where they are, and you have to get permission. Now, the Navy was a different breed of animal. They would get in their gunships, and they would just shoot the hell out of whatever they could see. But they also got in trouble every time because they were not following the rules of engagement. And those rules of engagement were pretty much true, I think, throughout the whole country, that there were certain protocols that you had to follow that made absolutely zero sense, except to the people back there smoking their cigars and drinking their scotch. It's insane.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if that same thing didn't happen even in the Gulf Wars.
Yeah.
No one will ever tell you, though.
Yeah. You spoke, David, about your grandchildren before. Have you ever spoken to your grandkids about this? Have they ever asked you questions, done anything for school?
I think only my granddaughter.
Your granddaughter.
Yeah, the youngest of them all.
Yeah.
Didn't have any interest.
Yeah.
And even my children, I think maybe within the last 5 to 10 years, we've had some discussions about it. And I know my son never had to serve, thank goodness.
Yeah.
He thanks me all the time.
Yeah. Oh.
And the interesting thing is, what is 50 years later, I get more thank you for your service than obviously I did in the first 40 years.
Yeah.
Not that you were looking for it, but.
What do you attribute that to? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. You'd have to ask people.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't understand. I really don't. Maybe it's because they had so many wars since then that they recognize that maybe you need to thank people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
If you had one thing to go back and tell your 20-year-old self before you went to Vietnam, what would you say to yourself, knowing what you know now? If you could have just genie in a bottle,
Okay. Well, to correct the record, I was 24 when I went.
Okay.
I was an old man compared to the vast majority of people there. Hindsight's great. And, if I could have said, you need to clean up your act, U.S. government, and make this war safe. But that wasn't going to happen. So I think what I would tell myself, and probably did, maybe subconsciously, is there've been a lot of people who've been there, learned from them. The ones who were there and had been there, you learn from them. And there's the old adage, don't volunteer for anything.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you a sad story about that. But and I guess the other thing is keep your head and ass down. Not that we were getting shot at.
Well, you had a certain awareness all day long, every day of your life over there.
Well, one other thing, when you talked about, taking care of the Vietnamese people, we also did things like, they were called medcaps. And it would be kind of like Doctors Without Frontiers, except they would go out for a day and inoculate people, give them medication, treat wounds. And these were the other things we did, acts of kindness, if you will, set up schools. I mean, we did do a lot of good things. Unfortunately, it came for naught.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, the three of us are not going to be here any longer. When we are not, and there is no one left on Earth who went through this experience of Vietnam, what message would you want to leave to those people?
Make peace, not war. Really, it is so tragic, the way you get involved in things. And, it's a multitude of pay grades above us. And why they don't understand this better is just unfathomable to me. I don't understand it. So I would say just try harder not to get involved in things like this. And it could be true with your neighbor too. I mean, these are just common sense things. Just, don't harbor ill will and just do good things.
Well, you bring goodness to the world around you all the time. I see that on a weekly basis. So
thank you.
And it's contagious, it's contagious. So thank you for making the world a better place, David.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing so much of your story with us and with our listeners. And thank you for just sharing wisdom and heart. I think that's super important in our world.
It is.
Thanks, Lori, for introducing us.
Oh, yeah. One of
You're
my
welcome.
favorites.
I can't say it was fun, but I'll tell you, it was close to fun.
Here comes the optimist, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, now I'm thinking of another question. Like the camaraderie probably made it fun, right? Sometimes is that what the friendships?
Yeah. We were particularly lucky because we were an entire group of people that trained and deployed from Fort Devens. And we were together for probably a good year and a half for the most part before they started shipping people out. So not everybody would have to be rotated at the same time. So we had an awful lot of time together. We knew their families. We knew their aspirations. We knew what they did in the real world. And I think the other thing that is kind of maybe different, I don't know, I was never in a combat unit, but we didn't have any ring knockers, if you know what those are.
I don't know if I know.
These are people who went to service academies.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Not that I have anything against them, but they're a great deal more competitive than we were. We were really there with one goal, and that was to provide excellent hospital care for people. So it was never a case of one-upmanship. You know, the guy I lived with before we deployed, he was my best friend when we were in Vietnam, and there was just never a case where you got angry at anybody. It was kind of unusual.
Yeah.
And, we did things together. Even when we were there, we did have an officers club. We were known to tip a few. We even had a softball team, which also reminds me, it was the first time I was ever brought into an emergency room on a stretcher when I ran into the second baseman who was, I think he was
And that's how you ended up in there in Vietnam. That's so funny.
He was King Kong.
Yeah.
He was huge. And I wrenched my knee a little bit. And I only remember that now because when we talk about the perimeter of the hospital, that very night I was on guard duty and we had to run out to the edge of the where the fence was. And it was agony. Full load of, you name it. I was in my full combat gear.
Wow.
So we had great friends. And I think the tragedy is we came from all over the U.S. and it was very difficult to keep track of them.
Yeah.
A couple of them I did for a while and then it kind of just dropped away. And then I think about 10 years ago, I went online to see if I could find anything about the 29th Evac Hospital. And there were a couple of entries, but nothing that would say that, there was an organization of veterans that got together or did things. So that was kind of unfortunate.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much, David.
You're welcome.
It's been such a pleasure and I've learned a lot myself.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you to you, David, and all of our listeners. And
thanks, Lori, again.
Okay.
And we'll see everyone next time.
All right. See you. Bye, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye, Dave.
Bye.